Liam realized that this new game was completely different from the ones he played at school with his friends. Liam was just 10 years old. Old and in elementary school, he enjoyed playing soccer and reading stories, but he mostly came home to an empty house because his parents were constantly working. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson owned a sizable store in the neighborhood market, and they toiled diligently every day to provide for Liam's needs. The school bus dropped him off at home every day at around 3 o'clock, and he would be left alone until 6 o'clock in the evening. One evening after his mother returned from the market, he complained, "I'm so bored staying here by myself." "Apologies, Liam." His mother said, "We have to work hard to pay for your school fees and other needs, even though it was only for 3 hours." Even though Liam understood, he occasionally wished they had more time for him. One day, Mrs. Johnson had a thought. "Liam suggested that we ask our next-door neighbor, Ms. Clara, to watch you until we get home." Liam's parents trusted Ms. Clara, their neighbor, a woman in her late 20s who lived alone and was a spinster, that is, unmarried, because she was consistently happy and kind. Liam concurred. He was acquainted with Ms. Clara, who was kind and frequently gave him small gifts. With his consent, Liam began staying at Ms. Clara's house, which was modest but tidy. Every time Liam returned from school, she always greeted him with a plate of food and a kind smile. Ms. Clara was incredibly kind. She would buy Liam cartoons and other entertaining children's movies for him to watch on her tiny television. She also got him a Game Boy video game, which he loved so much. Liam came and ate, and she would frequently ask how school was today. At first, Liam felt a little shy, but over time he became comfortable because of her cheerful personality and sweet stories. Ms. Clara whispered, "This is for you," with a kind smile. She gave him the toy for the first time with a smile on her face. At first, Liam was reluctant and bashful to pick it up, but she persisted, telling him that since he was the younger brother she never had, he would get anything he wanted. Liam thanked her heartily as he picked up the Game Boy, but everything changed on Tuesday afternoon. After Liam got home from school and was with Miss Clara, she proposed teaching him a new game that was only for the two of them. "Liam, nobody else is allowed to play or know about it," she said softly, almost in a whisper. But Liam did not understand the game at all. Miss Clara made him see things and do things way beyond his time. She guided his hand to explore her body, which greatly confused Liam. Even more confusing for Liam were the sounds Miss Clara made and her expressions as they played the supposed game. Midway, he interrupted by saying, "Miss Clara, I don't like this game." A worrisome and traumatized expression masked his face. "Don't worry, Liam. With time, you will come to enjoy this game," Miss Clara assured him. Little by little, this little secret game became a daily routine, one that Liam despised so much. He was young, tender, and too naive, and he never really understood the look of excitement or pleasure Ms. Clara had whenever they played this supposed game. Over time, Liam started dreading going to Ms. Clara's house. He would wait long hours in school after the closing bell before returning home. On days like Friday, when the school closed earlier than usual, he would drag his feet slowly on the road in a bid to come back home late. One day, after having yet another game session with Ms. Clara, Liam felt an urgent need to tell his parents, but he was scared. He couldn't explain why he was scared or felt reluctant to tell them, but he just had the feeling. Eventually, that evening, Liam walked up to his mother in the kitchen. "Mommy, I want to tell you something," he started with a slow tone, almost in a whisper. "What is it, Liam?" Mrs. Johnson asked, impatience plastered all over her reply as she turned her head swiftly from the kitchen sink. "Mommy, it's about Ms. Clara." Before he could continue, Mrs. Johnson cut into his speech midway. Liam, how many times did I call your name?" she asked with annoyance on her face. "Liam, your dad and I work hard and tirelessly to give you the best life we can afford. I know we are not always there for you, but Miss Clara is helping us fill that void for now. Don't worry, you will get to like her, and you both will become friends," Mrs. Johnson stated as she patted her son on his head. "But Mommy, no buts, Liam," Mrs. Johnson cut in. "Now return to your room and do your assignment, and don't talk about this issue again." "Yes, Mommy," Liam replied in sadness as he turned and headed out of the kitchen. That night, as Liam sat in his room, he cried silently because nobody wanted to listen to him. He didn't understand what Ms. Clara was doing to him, and now even his own parents did not have the time for him. But little did he know that his troubles were only getting started. The very next morning, when Liam woke up from sleep, he realized that he had urinated on the bed. Liam was shocked and tense at the same time. He had stopped bedwetting since he was a toddler, and besides, he did not drink excess water the previous night to warrant such an incident. Could this be a result of the game Ms. Clara plays with me? Liam thought as he reminisced. Worse still, he could not tell his parents lest his mother would beat him. She was a strict disciplinarian. Anyways, Liam managed to hide the mattress and change his clothes before anyone else would notice. But this issue of bedwetting persisted and continued for days. His parents were too busy to notice, but Liam knew that something was wrong. One day, after returning from school, Liam headed straight to Ms. Clara's house as usual. Ms. Clara was glad to see him and greeted him with a plate of rice and juice. After a while, when Ms. Clara came to play her game of touching with Liam, he quickly cut in, saying, "Ms. Clara, I don't like your game. It's making me urinate on my bed every day. I don't think I am feeling good." Ms. Clara's expression changed immediately. For a minute, she looked like she was deep in thought, trying to understand what she just heard. Then suddenly, she put on a light smile, moved close to Liam reassuringly, and said, "Don't worry, Liam. You will be completely fine. It is very normal for boys your age to bed wet. You will get over it." But this did not comfort Liam at all. He could not explain everything that was happening since he started this new game with Ms. Clara. He always felt unusually anxious the moment he stepped into her house. His heart beat faster than usual, and he could feel the beat from his chest. He just so dearly wished that his parents would start coming back from work early so that he would stop experiencing all these. Soon enough, this started affecting his attention in school. Liam, who was one of the brilliant pupils in class, could no longer concentrate on schoolwork. He no longer enjoyed playing like before. While his friends played in the school field during break time, Liam would just sit at a corner, lost in thoughts, images of Ms. Clara's body flashing all over his mind. His class teacher soon took notice of this newly found behavior from Liam. Mrs. Anichi was a loving and easy-to-relate-to teacher. All the students and pupils loved her for her playfulness and her kindness. But one special skill Mrs. Anichi had was her gift of observation. Mrs. Anichi could easily tell when a student was feeling bad or just had a mood swing. This singular trait of hers made her easily associate with the pupils. Mrs. Anichi had been observing Liam for a while and knew very well that something was wrong. He used to be a fun-loving and lively boy. Now he was mostly absent-minded and gloomy. After teaching in class one day, she asked Liam to wait behind and see her at her desk. "Liam, is anything the matter?" "You look lost these few days," Mrs. Anichi said as Liam stood in front of her desk with his head bowed in shame. He was contemplating whether to tell Mrs. Anichi or not. He was trying to speak, but the words felt too heavy for him to open up. "No, Ma, everything is fine," Liam lied. After some awkward moments of silence, Mrs. Anichi started, "Liam, if you are facing any personal challenges, feel free to share with me. I am your teacher. I am here to help you both educationally and otherwise." Eventually, she dismissed Liam, but Mrs. Anichi was not convinced. She had, in fact, confirmed that Liam was hiding something too big he was scared to open up about. That day, as Liam went back home, he prayed that his parents had returned so he wouldn't have to go to Ms. Clara's house. But alas, everything was just the same. He stayed at Ms. Clara's house, and as usual, she played her game. But something very strange happened this time around. While playing her game, Liam noticed that his genital organ became stiff and stood erect. This sent fear down his spine, and he swore to open up to Mrs. Anichi the next day. The next day in school, after a lesson, he walked straight to Mrs. Anichi's desk and, with his head bowed to the floor in embarrassment, began, "Auntie, I have something to tell you." Mrs. Anichi leaned closer to pay more attention as she wore a very serious and assuring look. Liam looked back and forth, left and right, just to ensure that nobody was eavesdropping or within a range that could hear what he was about to say. Then he leaned in closer to Mrs. Anici and whispered to her ears, "It's Ms. Clara, our neighbor at home. She does things to me and makes me do things I can't explain." Mrs. Anici was shocked. She paid vast attention as Liam narrated his experience. "Liam, you have done well, my boy." She started with a look of hope. "You don't have to feel bad. Nobody deserves to go through what you have been through in the hands of Ms. Clara. Don't worry. I will do everything in my power to help you." For the first time in weeks, Liam felt happy that someone had actually listened to him and was willing to help. On the other hand, he was scared because he didn't know what Ms. Clara's reaction would be when she found out. Mrs. Anici quickly had a meeting with the headmistress and some of the school board, and they all agreed that indeed the matter was serious and needed to be treated urgently. The school authority summoned Mr. and Mrs. Johnson to the school the very next day to discuss the new development from Liam. "Did Liam get into trouble?" Mrs. Johnson asked anxiously as she sat in the headmistress's office looking very impatient. "No, ma'am. Please have your seat." "What we are about to discuss is even far worse," the headmistress stated as she ushered them into her office. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, your son has revealed to us some sad incident about your neighbor, Ms. Clara. Liam said that Ms. Clara touches him every day. Are you aware of this?" "What?" Mr. Johnson thundered. He clenched his fist and stood up almost immediately from his seat. Mrs. Johnson was shocked to the bone marrow. Mrs. Anici, who was also present, narrated the whole ordeal to them just as she had been told by Liam. After much deliberation and begging, Mr. Johnson finally agreed not to take matters into his own hands, but to involve the necessary agencies involved in such crimes. That day, as school closed, Mrs. Johnson came to the school herself to pick up Liam and take him back home. "Liam, I am very sorry for not paying attention to you when you wanted to share your struggles with me. I was carried away with work, failing to pay attention to my own flesh and blood. Don't worry, your dad and I have things sorted out. You will feel confident again," she added as a tear crawled down her face. That evening, Ms. Clara received a heavy knock on her door. When she went to check who it was, she was met by the mean faces of 3 policemen dressed in black and holding guns. They were police officers. Mr. Johnson had returned with some police escorts, accompanied by Mrs. Anici and the school headmistress. "Ms. Clara, you are under arrest for child molestation," one of the officers stated. "You must be mistaken. You are in the wrong house," Ms. Clara defended, as she stood frozen in both fear, confusion, and shock. "It is best you remain silent. Anything you say or do will be used against you in the court of law," the same policeman with handcuffs interrupted as they arrested Ms. Clara and cuffed her hands. Meanwhile, Liam was too scared to go outside. He stayed back in his room and watched the entire event unfold from the window. He heaved a huge sigh of relief as he watched Ms. Clara being put in the police van and led out of the compound. From that day henceforth, Liam's parents started paying more attention to him. They took turns to come pick him from school daily and stay with him at home. At school, he was closely watched by Mrs. Anici, who reassured him and the other students to speak up whenever they were in trouble or needed adult assistance. The bedwetting continued, but the therapist Liam had been seeing had reassured his parents that he would eventually move past it as time passed, and he gradually recovered from the trauma.